Mark chapter 11, verses 27 to 33. They arrived again in Jerusalem, and while Jesus was walking in the temple courts, the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders came to him. "By what authority are you doing these things?" they asked. "And who gave you the authority to do this?" Jesus replied, I will ask you one question. Answer me, and I will tell you by what authority I am doing these things. John's baptism, was it from heaven or from men? Tell me. They discussed it among themselves and said, "If we say from heaven, he will ask, then why didn't you believe him? But if we say from men," they feared the people, for everyone held that John really was a prophet. So they answered Jesus, "We don't know." Jesus said, "Neither will I tell you by what authority I am doing these things." This is the word of the Lord.
This reading is from Mark chapter 12. He then began to speak to them in parables. A man planted a vineyard. He put a wall around it, dug a pit for the winepress, and built a watchtower. Then he rented the vineyard to some farmers and went away on a journey. At harvest time, he sent a servant to the tenants to collect from them some of the fruit of the vineyard. But they seized him, beat him, and sent him away empty-handed. Then he sent another servant to them. They struck this man on the head and treated him shamefully. He sent still another, and that one they killed. He sent many others. Some they beat, others they killed. He had one left to send, a son whom he loved. He sent him last of all, saying, "They will respect my son." But the tenants said to one another, "This is the heir. Come, let's kill him, and the inheritance will be ours." So they took him and killed him, and threw him out of the vineyard. What then will the owner of the vineyard do? He will come and kill those tenants and give the vineyard to others. Haven't you read this scripture? The stone the builders rejected has become the capstone. The Lord has done this, and it is marvelous in our eyes. Then they looked for a way to arrest him, because they knew he had spoken the parable against them. But they were afraid of the crowd, so they left him and went away.
Morning, can you hear me? Authority. I think that's the word, the theme, the idea that frames the whole passage that we've just read, really. Authority. I want to admit up front, open and honest, that authority, I think, is a word that comes with an awful lot of baggage, probably for an awful lot of people here. Whether that's a personal experience, an experience of seeing something on a national scale. Our world, in lots of ways, has turned the word authority into somewhat of a dirty word. And not without good reason, because I think a lot of the time when we hear authority, we think it sounds like power and control over people. We don't have to look too far to see leaders around the world misusing their authority. Misusing their authority in the way in which they could use that to further the good of others, and yet we see time and time again they take advantage. They use their authority for their own good, for their own gain, leaving others hopeless. But authority can be a wonderful thing. And I think it centers around who does the authority belong to. Because we'd all agree, wouldn't we, that an honest police officer that we might see walking the streets outside, going about their daily work, that is a good type of authority. They stop people from breaking the law, and if they do, they arrest them, they bring them in, and they keep society safe. And there are lots of examples like that of good authority in the world. But this passage speaks of an ultimate authority, an authority that lies with God. God, the creator and sustainer of everyone and everything. We sang in that first song, didn't we? This is his world. This is God's world. He has the right to command and to decree. He has the right to control. You kings, you rulers, be wise. Hear the Lord's decree. We sang in that first song. And today in our passage, in the God-man, in Jesus Christ, we see why God having authority is a wonderful, wonderful thing. And that it calls each of us to respond to him and his authority. We find ourselves here, we started kind of back up in this series in Mark's Gospel last week. We find ourselves in a part of the Gospel, Jesus is in his final week before he goes to the cross. And the first part of the Gospel, up to kind of the end of chapter 8, is all about who is Jesus until Peter turns to him and declares, you are the Messiah, you are God's chosen king. And we saw towards the end, it was sometime last year, I can't remember exactly when it was, we started to look at, after that, what does it look like to follow Jesus? What does it look like to follow him? Do you remember that analogy? It so sticks in my mind that Dave used of the Nike tick. I nearly wore my trainers this morning. I thought that might not be the thing to do. The life that goes down, to lose life now is to gain life for all eternity. To gain life now is to lose it. It's to lose it. 3 times Jesus talks about how he will walk that road. He foretells his death 3 times in chapters 8, 9, 10. Why does he call us to follow him? Because he is God's chosen king, because he is the Lord. And what will it look like to follow him? Well, it will be to go his way under his authority, to trust him and to obey him. So do have that passage open in front of you, and let's dive right back in at verse 27 of chapter 11. Starts, they arrived again in Jerusalem, Jesus and his disciples. If you remember last week, well, today in this passage, the temple looks quite different from the day before when Jesus had gone in. He'd turned the place totally upside down. There might still be some scattered bits of debris lying around. But the sights and the sounds of the money changers, the dove sellers, they're gone. The sound of noisy footsteps rushing with goods to sell of people around the temple, they're gone. What a scene that had been just yesterday. It's telling, isn't it, that the crowds had been left amazed. We read in last week's passage. The crowds were left amazed. The teachers of the law, the religious leaders, on the other hand, were left totally enraged by Jesus. So much so that in verse 18, if you just look back up the page, the chief priests and teachers of the law heard this and began looking for a way to kill him. They began looking for a way to get rid of him. And so today, upon spotting Jesus coming back into the temple, they're only going to one place. They head straight for him. And in verse 28, they don't pull any punches. This is your opportunity to be a religious leader as we read verse 28 together, if we could have that on the screen, if that's possible. Don't worry about they asked in the middle. Just read the 2 quotes with me together. By what authority are you doing these things? And who gave you authority to do this? I wonder whether you could capture a little bit more of the sense of the religious leaders. We sound a little bit bland and like we've recently, we're not very confident. I want you to picture someone's come to your house and you've invited them around for dinner. They've come in, they've turned the dinner table upside down. There's stuff lying everywhere. You're totally mad. And now let's read these verses again, slightly more as they might have been heard. Could we have those back on the screen? By what authority are you doing these things? And who gave you authority to do this? Who do you think you are? What right have you, Jesus, to come in here, throw your weight around, to turn this temple upside down? Do you know who we are? We're in charge here. Did we say you could do this? Did we? Who do you think you are? Jesus responds, not by giving them a straight-up answer, but he asks them a question of his own. He doesn't do this to come across clever in an argument that's about to go on and on and on with these religious leaders. Instead, Jesus asks them this question to reveal their hearts that lie behind their question. Who do you think you are? Verse 30. John's baptism, was it from heaven or of human origin? Tell me. They discussed it among themselves and said, if we say from heaven, then he'll ask, then why didn't you believe him? But if we say of human origin, well, they feared the people, for everyone held that John really was a prophet. Do you see their problem, their rock and their hard place? On the one hand, they fear the people they love to have authority and control over, but they seem to be on Jesus' side. But on the other hand, if they admit that he's sent from heaven, then, well, they're going to have to give up their authority to him, aren't they? Surely they'll be admitting that he has a higher authority than them. And so sheepishly they say, we don't know. Jesus, well, he'd healed the sick, he'd calmed the wind and the waves, he'd fed 5,000 people. It's not that they don't know who he claims to be. But why do the religious leaders respond so badly to Jesus? Do you think it's because they want to protect the people that they've been given to look after, or is it really because they want to protect themselves? Their answer is very revealing, isn't it? Their answer reveals that they want to protect themselves. They're not concerned with trying to oust some false prophet who's come. They're just concerned with losing their grip on the power and the authority, their reputation that they have. And it seems like they'll do anything to protect it. They want to trip Jesus up. They want to get rid of him. And so Jesus begins telling them this parable. I used to think this parable was quite a kind of a big judgment moment of Jesus. I think I used to see it as a kind of gotcha moment. Jesus just declaring to them, I've got you. I've nailed you down. You're admitting that you're only in it for yourself. However, as I've been looking over this and reading and praying, I feel like I've come to see that this parable is actually held out by Jesus in, yes, judgment, but also great, great kindness and patience to the very people who hate him most. That's because God's authority is unlike any other. God's authority is unlike any other. Because God doesn't use his authority for self-preservation. He uses it for self-giving. Jesus doesn't tell this parable to make a clever point, to prove his authority, to go, ha ha, I told you so. To say, look at what a mess you've made, you've blown it. Instead, he tells this parable to give them one more chance. But when I reflect on that, that's so different from how I often think about using any authority that I have. Isn't it so easy to just love the feeling of being a bit better than someone else, being in charge? That's exactly what the religious leaders love about their authority. While they're here, all about proving their point, being right, looking good, using their authority to further their own good, Doesn't Jesus stand in beautiful contrast? He could not be more different. He doesn't use his authority selfishly, but for the good of others. Let's read from verse 1 as Jesus paints the scene. A man planted a vineyard. He put a wall around it, dug a pit for the winepress, and built a watchtower. And then he rented the vineyard to some farmers and moved to another place. Jesus paints a scene here that's only too familiar with his hearers, and it's worth us getting a little bit of a leg up and catching up with what this would have landed like for the religious leaders, so we're kind of in on the know. Because certain characters and things in this story represent certain characters in real life. The vineyard that we read of, that is the people of Israel, God's chosen people. The image of a vineyard for them would have had really sacred, important meaning. In the temple where they stood having this exchange, maybe dwarfing them as they're speaking, is a huge grapevine carved about 30 meters high. I think that's probably taller than this building. Branches and leaves of the finest gold, bunches of grapes where the grapes are costly jewels. They know that the vineyard represents them, the people of Israel. The owner of the vineyard who plants the vineyard, that is God. Do you see his love, how he plants it and he cares for it? He puts a fence around it to protect it. He builds a watchtower to look after it, to keep it from enemies. And the tenants, well, they are the spiritual leaders of Israel. They're the very religious leaders who are stood in front of Jesus as he speaks. We know from reading later, they know full well that this is who they are in the story. Do you see the owner? He gave the tenants everything they needed to take good care of the vineyard, the people. And the produce that he sends a servant back for ought to have been bountiful harvests of people walking God's good way. The abundant kindness of God in giving this vineyard, handing this beautiful vineyard on a plate to the tenants. Well, what we read next is really shocking, isn't it? From verse 2, at harvest time, the owner, he sent a servant to the tenants to collect from them some of the fruit of the vineyard. But they seized him, beat him, sent him away empty-handed. Then he sent another servant to them, and they struck this man on the head and treated him shamefully. He still sent another, and that one they killed. He sent many others. Some of them they beat, others they killed. This parable summarizes, if you like, God's history with Israel, Israel's history and God's dealing with them, where the owner's servants in this parable are the people that God sent to his people time and time again, his prophets, to call them back to God, to repent, to tell them you have strayed from God's good way, turn back to God. And where the people were unfaithful, God was always faithful. The prophets kept being sent, and the leaders of the people kept rejecting them and their message from God. Hebrews chapter 11 describes the prophets like this. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, they were killed with the sword. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, afflicted, mistreated, of whom the world was not worthy, wandering about in deserts and mountains and in dens and caves of the earth. God's servants mistreated and killed because they were a threat to their authority. These prophets who came proclaimed words that were hard to hear, words that were telling them to turn around and change their ways and follow God. And so often they responded when their authority was questioned by doing anything necessary to hang on to power, wealth, and reputation that they had. Do you know, you might be asking yourself a question that I ask myself as I read this. Why does the owner of the vineyard, why does he keep sending servants? Why does he keep sending servants? Because surely by the fifth, sixth, seventh servant, by then surely you know what might happen, what's going to happen, what's 99.99% likely to happen. Why did God keep sending prophets? But sometimes God gets painted as a kind of unfair judge, doesn't he? Who sort of loves to condemn people to hell without a care in the world. Doesn't this parable really, really challenge that? This parable doesn't speak of a God who loves to condemn people, who doesn't care. I mean, could he care any more? I want you to imagine you were the owner of this vineyard and you watch servant after servant return with blood on their face, bones broken, waiting up to see whether the next servant made it back or whether you'd be holding a funeral in the morning. It's outrageous that they keep getting away with it, isn't it? The tenants, it's outrageous. Where is the justice for these servants? But the owner keeps sending. Maybe this time they'll come to their senses. Maybe this time. How would you respond if you were the owner? I think Martin Luther summed it up pretty well when he said, if I were God and the world treated me as it treated him, I would kick the wretched thing to pieces. I'm inclined to agree, aren't you? But God's authority is unlike any other. He keeps sending, but the stakes are about to be raised. You know, I don't even think for one moment I would consider sending my son into that, knowing what they've done to the others. But I am not God. Because here the parable moves from the past into the present. Because finally the master of the vineyard did send his son. Surely they will respect my son. And then come these really, really chilling words of prophecy from Jesus, not designed to lord it over the religious leaders, but to cut them right to the heart. Because Jesus now is no longer talking to them in the past, in referring to what their ancestors, the old leaders of Israel, did. He's looking them in the eye and saying, this is your time. Verse 6. He had one left to send, a son whom he loved. He sent him last of all, saying, they will respect my son. But the tenants said to one another, this is the heir. Come, let's kill him, and the inheritance will be ours. So they took him and killed him and threw him out of the vineyard. The owner could do no more. He sent everything that he has to these tenants. God could do no more than sending his own son. But that's what we've been reflecting on at Christmas time. That Jesus coming is not just another messenger. It's God himself coming down. Emmanuel, God with us. The only one who's walked the earth with the authority to conquer death and bring people with him into heaven. So rather than this being judgment, this is a plea to the religious leaders. Please turn back and respect his authority. But what for the tenants is another chance of repentance in the parable, another chance of turning back, another chance of honoring the master and receiving forgiveness becomes the ultimate act of greedy, self-centered, opportunistic violence as they murder the son. It is brutal. They killed him and they just threw him like a rag out of the vineyard. Just 3 days later, the words of the parable, well, they will begin to unfold in real life. Unwilling to accept and bow the knee before the son stood before them, the religious leaders would kill him in real life. Surely the inheritance will be ours, they thought. Surely with him out the way, our place and authority are safe. But the parable doesn't end there, because the story does not end there. They might be dealing with the one whose authority is unlike any other, whose patience and mercy knows no match. But the owner of the vineyard's authority will not be mocked. They may kill the son, but he will have the final word. The buck stops with God. He has the final word. God's authority is final. And it's clear, isn't it? His final authority will be in judgment on those who continue to resist him. And the judgment will be their destruction. Look with me at verse 9. What then will the owner of the vineyard do? He will come and kill those tenants and give the vineyard to others. It's a really stark warning, isn't it? And it's not unjust. God is not trigger happy. God is slow to anger. He is merciful. He is persistent. He's oh so forgiving. He is the God of second and third and fourth and fifth and sixth chances. But he is a God who is just. His authority is a just authority. And to those who continue to reject him, they will be cast out. They will be judged. And the very God-given place they thought they had, it will be given to others. And yet we read in verse 12, don't we, that even with this warning, the religious leaders, they plot to arrest him and to get rid of him, because they knew he had spoken the parable against them, and they were simply too proud to see the goodness of Jesus' authority. And like the religious leaders, we too have opportunity to respond to Jesus' authority. And maybe you're here and you've never thought of what it looks like to respond to Jesus' authority. There is a kind of sense of a first time of turning to Jesus, of saying, no longer my authority, but I want to live under your good and kind and loving authority. But there is also a daily, isn't there? A daily sense of trust and obey, like we were looking at a couple of weeks ago. A daily sense of, today, Lord, I trust in your authority. Today, Lord, I will be obedient to you and your good ways. And I think there are two ways in which we might respond to Jesus' authority wrongly. And there's one way that this passage maybe calls us to respond to his authority rightly. I think the two ways that we can respond to Jesus' authority wrongly are because we believe something about it that isn't actually true. We believe something about Jesus' authority that isn't really true. I've got two things with me to illustrate this. The first is this. Here's the first thing that we believe about Jesus' authority that makes us a bit like one of these big exercise balls. Let me start with this. A little show of hands. Who loves receiving criticism here? That was the response I imagined I would get. You know, when I tell my son Ezra off at home, he has two ways to responding to that authority. And the first is this, is that he gathers all his might in his little body and he charges at me with his forehead and he buries his forehead into my thigh, probably shouting, "You're not my best friend anymore." That's response number one. Now, I might be a much more grown-up version of that. But how do I sometimes respond when God confronts me with an area of sin in my life, or he calls me to make peace with someone who I'm just really mad at, or when he's leading me or us through a time of suffering that just doesn't make sense to us? Because one option I have is I can make myself really big. I can make myself really big and charge at him like the religious leaders. Who do you think you are, God? I deserve better than this, and if this is what it is to follow you, I don't like it. You're asking too much of me, and actually, I'm out. He calls us to follow him, living the Nike-tick life. Might be in the way we spend our time or money. That can be quite a good indicator for me, for us maybe, of who is authoritas. Who is authoritas? That might not be a word. Who is in authority in our lives? If we want to live for wealth, material goods, and to live what just pleases me, then Jesus is a real threat to that, isn't he? And so I might respond like this. But maybe the thing we're believing about God's authority is that he doesn't want what's best for us. Is that maybe one of the lies we believe? That God doesn't want what's best for us? Does this passage at all convince you that that isn't true? That that actually isn't true? Because look at Jesus' patience with the religious leaders, those who are just so blatantly, openly against him, who hate him most of all maybe. Look at his patience. He's so kind and good and loving. We asked ourselves, didn't we, why would God, the owner of the vineyard, send his son? Why would he do that when he must have known what would happen to him? It's exactly because he isn't against people, not wanting the best for them. He is so for us. He is more for you than anything else in this world, even yourself could be. His authority is so beautiful as he uses it for your good all the time. And if we're like the religious leaders sometimes and we're keeping Jesus at bay because we doubt his good authority, then we've seen there is a warning for the future. But there is grace for right here, for right now. There is grace to turn to him. I am convinced that Jesus would have welcomed these religious leaders with open arms had they turned to him for forgiveness. He would do the same for you if that's you today. There's a second wrong response, I think, that is quite different. It's a bit like this. Ezra sometimes responds to my telling him off in the opposite way to that big bouncy ball, in the opposite way to charging at me with his forehead. If I tell him off, he might go and find Mummy's leg or some other large-looking item in the room that we're in, and he'll go and try and hide behind that. He will make himself as small as possible. It's the exact opposite from charging at me. He hides. And as I've been preparing this week, I think God's put on my heart that lots of us here will find that we respond to God's authority like this, to make ourselves as small as possible. Ezra in that moment is not shouting, "I'm not your best friend anymore." Instead, he's thinking, what if Daddy won't be my best friend anymore? Do you see the difference? Maybe you feel like that sometimes. Maybe you feel like that this morning. You recognize God's authority, but you've come in here this morning and you look at your own life and you think, what if God won't be my best friend anymore? Maybe I've just messed it up too many times. Those actions that really hurt someone this last week, will that relationship ever get repaired? I'm living with this sin I just can't shake. My friends at school, they don't even know I'm a Christian. I'm so embarrassed about it. I feel so ashamed about that. Why would God want anything? Why would he want anything to do with me? Do you see how easy it is to think of God's authority like other types of authority, a job that you could get sacked from, a crime that might send you to prison, a friendship that might end because hurt has been caused, but God's authority is unlike any other. He is so relentlessly for you. He is so relentlessly for you. Remember him as the owner of that vineyard, persevering in love for those who went against him. He uses everything in his authority, everything necessary to forgive you of your sins, to bring you back to him, even when it costs him the life of his son. He is so patient and so kind and so merciful that we do not need to hide from him. So what does it look like to respond rightly to him? Well, look with me at verse 6. He had one left to send, a son whom he loved. He sent him last of all, saying, "They will respect my son." They will respect my son. The word respect here is not some distant kind of polite wave at somebody. It's not a distant thing. It's a falling down on your knees kind of respect. It's acknowledging who I am and who God is. To respect Jesus is to worship him, to follow him, to live out the Nike life after him, to echo his words from the Garden of Gethsemane, not my will, but yours, trusting that his authority is totally and utterly for my good, and to look up from that position, knelt before him, and for him to say, "Come to me, I am for you, and I love you." Let's take a moment just to reflect on those things. And then the band will come up and lead us in some songs of response to that.